Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 15 of the Titanforge podcast. My name is Dratnos. Joining me, as always, is my friend Trell.
Hello.
And my friend Tuttles.
What's up, guys?
And joining us this week, special guest, Jason XD Rothel.
Hi, hello.
Jason is my guild leader of the Guild Poetry Club on US Titanforge, server 4th, by the way. No big deal.
Wait, are you guys actually server 4?
Yeah.
Top 20 server.
US top 20, server 4th. Titanforge is a competitive environment now, okay?
Wait, who's on Tig? Essence?
Essence, Incarnate, and Nerfed. Nerfed got us by an hour this tier. It was really rough.
You guys always get beat by Nerf by an hour, it seems like.
We beat them on Cahoon and Jaina and Do Not. This is the first time this expansion we lost to them.
Yes, this expansion, never mind.
But in Legion, they got us by a day or more every... except for Argus, we killed it the same night as them, but we raided later.
Wait, maybe Poetry Club's been better than I remember.
Yeah,
as of late.
It's we've been on the come up in terms of like world ranks pretty much consistently. This tier was worse for us than Crucible.
Parse Culture and the Tuba Sargeras time.
Yeah. So that is actually the Parse Culture Poetry Club is part of the reason we have Jason on the show today. We're going to talk about leadership, guild leadership, raid leadership, and leadership in Mythic Plus, which are topics that obviously Jason knows a lot about, being a guild master. Having once when I started in Parse Culture, he was a officer and was our like main tank. And then after our old GM quit, he became our new GM and has led us ever since, including when we disbanded and reformed his Poetry Club, which is a fun little maneuver, which some would say was to lob half of our roster, but haters will hate, you know.
What's Jason got to say about that?
No comment. I'll say staying a guild hasn't really stopped us this tier from doing not quite the same, but
Still good. Top 20 is good.
Yeah, barely, very barely 20th, but top 20 for sure. It's really actually a really big breakpoint. It's 20th to 21st because that means you're on the front page of WoW Progress versus being on the second page for when people are looking at US guilds. So, and we'd been 21st for like many. There are multiple tiers in our history where we've been 21st, and it's been really annoying.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much everybody still uses WoW Prog for recruiting, even though Raider.io is like sufficiently better for every other aspect, which is weird. Yeah,
Raider.io. If Raider.io had a recruitment system as good as WoW Progress's, it would be, I think, used for everything. I think people would stop using WoW Progress entirely because like WoW Progress is really like an ancient website. I don't know.
I mean, I feel like the bar is low though. Like for Raider.io to be better than WoW Progress, you just need to be able to filter like shit.
Yeah, I think that a good recruitment design would be pretty huge. And there's also kind of a bit of inertia with WoW Progress. Like, with something like a recruiting thing, it matters that there are people on both sides of it. So part of the product that WoW Progress has right now is that everybody's using it. But like WoW Progress used to be where you'd go for M+ score, right? Before Raider.io just had a better product. I don't know if you guys remember that, but that was back when like depleting versus not depleting didn't really matter. It was just the highest key you could do, no matter how slow it was, basically.
Shout out to Relic.
You could do like an hour 30 Black Arc Hold, and it would be good points in the WoW Prog, but really low points in Raider.io. So you'd be like, oh, look at my WoW Prog score.
Mm-hmm.
Meow Chain at Relic with 8-hour fucking upper carry runs. I remember those very vividly. Yes.
Oh yeah.
We had like a 3-hour like 27 Eye of Ashar or something like back in 7.2, and that was awesome. Huge WoW Prog score.
God damn it.
And I know Raider.io, like, they stated early on that recruitment was like part of what they were trying to put together. Like, that was part of the reason they did it in the first place. That's why it's called Raider.io, not Mythic Plus IO. But they kind of stopped doing that, I guess. I don't know. Maybe they'll go back and do it again. But like WoW Progress is kind of bad. You can only filter by the people that started looking for a guild in like time order and item level. That's the only two filters you can do for that recruitment. So,
yeah, Warcraft logs would also be a site that could. I don't know. The thing about both WoW Progress and Warcraft logs is that they're like maintained by people who don't play WoW anymore. which makes it it makes it kind of that they're a bit disconnected from what WoW players actually are, what features WoW players want and stuff. Anyways, that's not our main topic this week. But before we get to our main topic, let's talk a little bit about Mythic Plus and what we've been up to, because of course Mythic Plus is what most of us have been up to. Although Jason, not so much a Mythic Pluser anymore. Jason, you used to be a Mythic Pluser. You used to be you competed in the first MDI, right? The first all the way to the global finals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, not to the final two or anything, but
to the top 8.
Our team got to top 8. It was a harrowing journey, but we did make it. Couldn't make it past Meowchan and the Raider IO team. But and then of course our other U.S. competitors got to play Rockmora's enemy. So.
Holy shit, dude! It's been so long.
That was the team that just could not defeat Rockmora, right?
They gave up on Rockmora. It was too hard.
I mean, this is not a free boss, I guess.
Watching that MDI, I was laughing.
That MDI was so fucking scuffed. Everybody was so bad.
All right, Trell, how about you? You of course have an MDI that you're currently trying to get to BlizzCon in, and it's approaching this weekend. Your last chance to do that. What's the situation looking like for you?
Yeah, this is our last cup for the season, and after this, we'll know if we are 4th going into BlizzCon, which would get us into BlizzCon, or if we were 5th and we barely missed it. And the 4th place would be a 40K team. And so we have to get either 3rd or 2nd in this cup, realistically, to make it. So we've been practicing pretty hard.
Yeah, and there's some other teams that have not been practicing as hard as well because of Classic and stuff, so this is the time to do it.
There is hope.
Although
there is hope, yeah.
The tough thing is 40K has also stepped on the gas a little bit more this cup than they have the last 2 cups, so...
Yeah, it's pretty obvious they didn't try at all the last 2 cups because they were just trying to get their free slip into BlizzCon, but now they realize there might be a chance they don't make it, so I think they're practicing quite a bit.
Yeah,
but if it works out, I mean, both teams, us and 40K, would have to play Method EU and Method NA in our first rounds, and then we might play each other. So it should be a pretty good death match.
Yeah, you guys have to you have to unseat one of the you both have to beat a Method team, and then you have to beat them, or they have to have lost the other Method team. Yep. And then they basically need to get out of the tournament immediately, and you need to make it to 3rd place in order to get to BlizzCon. Or if you get 2nd or 1st, they can do a little bit better, right? And you can still win.
Yeah, they could get 6th. I think it was what the math was. If they get 4th, I think we have to get 1st.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is tough, but not impossible. Not impossible. I hear there's been a lot of practice happening with you and your team. You might be the team that's practiced the most for this cup among all MDI teams.
Maybe. We didn't practice the last day and today, but we'll see. I mean, cups can go any direction. The last West Cup that we had, number 2, was a complete shit show where every team had like 20 death average in the last 4 matches. It was pretty bad.
Yeah, that was rough.
Yeah. For Tettles and myself, though, keys are very much open. We're having a great time on live, doing live keys, because the affixes this week are Bursting, Volcanic, Fortified, and then the Beguiling pattern is Arcane Heavy. The Arcane Heavy pattern is like the only one that's reasonable for a lot of dungeons. Most of the like really problematic emissary spawns happen on the Tides weeks or the Void weeks, so the Arcane week is kind of a breath of fresh air from those like Void in the middle of the path to Volcall type situations, or it's the only one where the left pull on a Taldazar doesn't have a Tides in it, for instance, those 6 mobs that you can pull together with Lust or whatever. So it's a really good week for pushing live keys. I think this is going to be the best week on the calendar, actually, for live keys.
I would agree. It seems like the stars align where the base affixes are good and the emissary rotation is good. Because
there's only 4 weeks that have the Arcane pattern, of which there's only 2 Fortified weeks. And Bursting Volcanic, any week where Volcanic is active is a good week because that's the only affix that doesn't do anything on the level 7 row. Skittish is the next best one, I'd say, but that one, causes problems in some spots. Volcanic also causes... I think those 2 are pretty comparable, actually. In terms of how much they affect the map. And then Bursting is an affix that a lot of people hate, and it is overtuned a little bit, I think, but one of the things about Bursting is that in really high keys, it's not as bad as it is in 10s, because it does the same amount of damage in a 22 as it does in a 10, right? Bursting stacks are just % health based. They don't scale with key level. The slower you're killing mobs, the more slowly you're pulling the dungeon, the less damage Bursting is going to do to you, right? If you do a 10 in 15 minutes, you're actually, versus a 20 in 30 minutes, you're taking twice as much DPS from the bursting stacks, right? So
Yeah,
I think this makes a
and
really good
DPS
week for high keys.
And DPS players have cooldowns up for bursting stacks more often for hierarchies because they take longer to get there.
Right. So all in all, just a great week for high keys and a pretty good week for lower keys as well. Although bursting does make it kind of hard to spam tens because it's hard to find healers, and you get the 16 stack, everybody dies. That experience is pretty common, I think, in pug keys.
That would probably tilt the shit out of me if I got a 16 stack of bursting.
Yeah. That happens in this first room of Shrine of the Storm.
Yeah, we did that in Shrine yesterday, and
Yeah.
everyone forgot it was bursting, and we all lived because we had a good comp position. We had 2 rogues and a mage, all immune. We had a paladin who immuned it, and then I had Zen Meted and immuned it pretty much.
Wait, you were playing with a pally healer? What in the world?
Yeah,
Was
pretty
it
good.
Jam Z?
No, it was Cores on his paladin.
Okay.
Of course, you made up for it with the 2 rogues. So
Yeah, that's the thing about Rogue is that whatever the affix is, Rogue counters it. Bursting, explosive, doesn't matter. It's all skittish. It actually all of them get countered by Rogue. It's great because Rogue doesn't have very much else going for it, so it's nice that they're good against the affixes too. Okay, so yeah, that's this week where we'll be doing a lot of keys and stuff, and then I don't know, keys might be closed for the next couple weeks. We'll have to see. That we have 3 more weeks where we don't know the affixes, and then we start knowing them again. But let's move on to talking about our main topic. First, though, let's shout out a little bit of our social media presence. We're on Twitter at Titanforge WoW. We are on Discord. You can get a Discord link wherever you found this episode. If we're doing our jobs, there should be a Discord link below it, so you can come join our Discord. And we also have a Patreon, patreon.com/Titanforge, where you can support the show. And some of the rewards include getting your name read on each show. And that reward has been earned by Paul, Q, Tettles Jr., aka Never Nude, and Ahar of US Proudmore. So and he said they said Ahar like a pirate, so Ahar maybe. I don't know how R would go on that one, but
That's how I imagined it.
yeah, it does. It literally does say like a pirate, so I think that's doing it justice. All right, let's move on to our main topic, which is leadership, guild leadership, which Jason, you've now had. You took over Parse Culture leadership in Antorus, right? After Tomb Progression was done, so you had Antorus, Uldir, Battle of Dazar'alor, Crucible of Storm. You had 5 raids now of being a GM, which is a reasonable amount, a pretty sizable amount. I don't know how do we want to start this conversation? I guess what's been the thing that's kind of surprised you the most, or the biggest piece of advice you'd have for somebody looking to take on the mantle of being a GM in a guild? If you could go back in time, maybe to yourself at the end of Tomb of Sargeras and give yourself some words of wisdom.
Well, it's a good question because I mean, there's lots to know and lots I'm sure I still don't know. But if I were to go back and tell myself one thing, I guess it's a couple sentences, but it's one thing. It's find people that you actually trust to do the officer job and get them to do it. Because one of the biggest problems that I have found so far is finding like the right people to not just help you with like the jobs of a GM, because it's not like there's a lot of responsibilities that come from leadership of a guild. But if you're doing them alone, it's completely overwhelming. There's just so much to do, and that goes for raid leadership as well. But you can also put yourself in trouble by trusting people that shouldn't be. Like they might be good at some things, but some of the other jobs that you're then giving them, they shouldn't really have, or like having like a mouthpiece of a leader of a guild is something that they shouldn't have. And so I think that really want to evaluate officer decisions a lot better than I did at some points. And I think that I've learned that lesson a little more now, and it's I think part of why it's been fun doing Poetry Club as opposed to like towards the end of Parse Culture where it was miserable. So
do you actually think that like officers can be appointed, or do you think they have to like want it in some sense? Because like somebody like Dratnos, he would be a good officer, but if he necessarily didn't want it, because Dratnos is an officer in Parse Culture, but like if he didn't want it at the end of the day, do you think that make him just innately worse and like not a good fit, or do you think there needs to be a sense of like leadership within the guild?
There's definitely, it's a give and take. Like, they might not just walk up to you and be like, I want to be an officer, right? But if they're not like opposed to it, then it's something that they're willing to like try and grow into, then it's something that they can succeed at. So I think you don't want to necessarily like just be like, okay, well, no one's coming to me to be an officer. I guess I have no officers. You got to go talk to people and see what they're willing to do. Like, I know one of our officers, Dippin, who he does a lot of good things for our guild. Like, he hadn't come to me directly about wanting to be an officer, and he mentioned to someone else that he would be willing to if I'd asked him, but I have to ask him basically. So I did, and I mean, I think it's worked out. So part of it's knowing, not necessarily knowing, but like just talking to the people that you think would be a right fit, and some of it, how you decide they're a right fit is completely questionable, right? Like, Dippin has experience leading a guild, so I was like, okay, well, maybe he'd be a good fit, and he's very active, participates, and so I decided that would be a good thing for us. So, and that criteria might be different for other people. I think it's good to have multiple roles as officers as well. They can see things that you don't necessarily. It's not 100% required, but it's helpful, and it's getting down to it. It's just, you definitely don't know whether someone's going to be a good officer, but you can look for the signs that they could be.
And people, sometimes people like the officers that Parse Culture had before we became Poetry Club, like, I think this is something that happens with a lot of people, is they kind of, as their commitment to the game changes, or as their status changes, they'll go from being good or bad players and or officers to the other of those. So like, I think one thing you have to watch out for in a guild is you can't just have like a static idea of how good your raiders are. I think people sometimes think about people this way, they'll have a name and they'll just think, okay, that person's good. But people go from being good to being bad within a tier if they like, their hours at work change, they're not sleeping as much, they don't have as much time to play the game outside of raid. All of a sudden they stop being good in raid, and you have to kind of be updating and the same things happen with officers, right? Like, if people can lose interest in being an officer, they can lose interest in whatever responsibilities they have, of which there are a bunch of different ones, and you kind of need to be ready to adapt as people change there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I've seen that just from myself, like previously in another guild, like I had kind of the same thing happen. Like, my hours changed. I was sleeping a lot less. The raid schedule became terrible for me, and I felt my performance take just a complete nosedive, right? And so I noticed that, and before I was removed, I removed myself and ended up forming Parse Culture, which had better times for me at the time, and so it definitely. Going through it myself, I was able to recognize it in some people, but it's still, you have blind spots sometimes, right? Like, someone could have been good for so long, and then like finally something clicked and they stopped being good, and it's hard to necessarily see, okay, when did that happen, right? Did that happen really gradually? Did that just like instantly one night they just stopped being good? It's hard to say. If it's gradual too, it can be really hard to pick up on, but it's something that I think is really important to do, like reviews of your roster regularly, like see, okay, how is everyone performing actually? Like, who's making the mistakes, who's doing stuff like that, and then you can pick up on some of those issues more a little earlier instead of having it be way too late.
Yeah, and this, I guess our advice, like, this episode is going to mostly be focused on our experience as like US top 20. That kind of environment, world top 100 or whatever, where we've got a mythic rating roster that's like, we expect people to show up pretty much 100% of nights during progression. We are willing to remove people from the roster if they are performing badly. But your experience and the things that are important for you as a guild leader might be different if you're in a guild that like you're not going to remove people. Like, and there's a lot of guilds like this, right, where they're like, if you like the person and if they're trying, you're not going to remove them. So that might be like, you might have a different set of just tools and responsibilities as a guild leader in that spot. So definitely keep that in mind too.
Yeah, definitely. It's also like, for those guilds, you have to just like friendship can definitely outweigh performance, and it's hard even as like a top 20 guild sometimes, because like there's some people that I've really really liked, and it's just like they're not playing well enough for the rest of the roster. It's like you got to make a decision. It's hard even at this level, very very difficult. But lower if you are lower on the ranking, or you just don't like prioritize like your ranking, because some don't care, and that's fine. Then that's not an issue. You don't have to prioritize that, and that's okay.
So with that said, do you think there will always be like weak links on the roster? I know whenever I was first like playing, I thought eventually that I was gonna get to a point where everybody was as good as I am, and then it was like everybody's gonna be like super fucking sick, and no mistakes are ever gonna be fucking made, and like we're all gonna own, and it's all gonna like work itself out. And then just like the more I've rated, the more I've realized that it's never gonna be like that. And it's
well,
like,
then
wait,
Method starts streaming, and you
don't
just see
make
them like
mistakes?
inting on their polls as well, and you're just like, okay, there's not any guilds where they don't do
Fucking-
this. Yeah.
70 wipes to Mechatorque just dying to the fucking bombs and the Buster Cannon. You're just like, what the fuck are they?
Yeah.
No, impossible. Like it's just because like things can change on a fight to fight, right? Because some people could be good on 99% of fights, and they could be awesome at it, and then there's just like that one fight that they just kind of suck on, right? It might not even be
That
the
is
whole
so
time.
true.
Maybe they pick it up after like 50 pulls or something, but it's like you already kind of blew 50 pulls on this guy, not really knowing what's going on. It's like this guy's a legend. He's awesome. How is he screwing this up? I mean, it happens. It
Yeah.
does.
I think everybody has those fights that they're bad on. I notoriously was really bad on God King Scovald. I would say I'm probably pretty bad on. Let's say I'm pretty bad on Adderus and Aspects too. That fight fucking sucks, bro.
Yeah, I've never seen a Moonkin live that fight, actually. Anytime I've done that dungeon.
Fight sucks my ass. Like, it's
Oh, I
so
should have
bad.
probably gone bear form.
Well, they're just like, I had to down it with Moonfire, man. I knew I would take the lightning shield damage, but like that global is worth so much damage. What, you want me to give
I
that
just
up?
wanted to let the Solar Wrath go.
Yeah.
I know it's gonna cleave, but my damn.
But yeah, that's, I mean, part of the challenge of being a guild leader, right, is like, okay, you have this responsibility of maintaining a roster, right? And like sometimes people will be really bad on a fight, and it'll still be worth keeping them on the roster because they're like good. So you have to make these like value judgments with like, it's really hard to just have like a objective number thing. You kind of have to have just a discussion with your officers and like figure out who is going to be on the roster, and that's a really challenging like art. Building this roster of, it's not just 20 people as well. It's usually like 25-ish people, of which there are a couple that mostly are on the bench more often than others, right? That's kind of like it's usually not 25 people who see equal playtime, and you need to figure out like which 20 people are going to be in for the end boss fight of the tier, and whether somebody's performance means that they should be kicked or whether they should be benched or all that stuff. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how.
Or Swift talking to.
Pulling people aside.
I think in general, the performance should probably not get you kicked from a guild. I feel like that needs to be more of like an attitude thing. I feel like most guilds are kind of okay with you riding the bench if you're more comfortable with that, especially if you're like underperforming. But then like kicking you, there probably needs to be like some cultural shift where you're just like not fucking doing it for the guild. Because if they like you, they'll probably just keep you around. Like if you don't see prog, you're okay with that. It's like fine, right?
Yeah, there's some different mindsets that different guilds
disagree with
have,
you on that
right?
one.
Because like in some guilds, like if you're not expecting to see progress, like if we in Poetry Club think that you're like not good enough to see progress, it's kind of not fair to anybody to have you on the roster. Like, I mean, if you're okay with it, but like
if they know,
yeah,
like,
and we have a couple. We have like some slots where in our past and our present, we've had people on our roster that like play a spec that's currently bad, but play it really well. And so we kind of have these conversations with them where we're like, okay, if this spec is good, we'll have you in, but like until it's good, you're mostly going to be on the bench if you don't, switch over to a different spec, which obviously, if you don't want to do, that's fine. So as long as you're okay with that, that's okay. But we really generally, anytime we've had the case of somebody underperforming, we don't like have bench spots really, like spots. If we don't have faith in somebody's abilities, we generally just tell them, we lob them.
Certainly long term, like in the tier, you don't necessarily lob someone because you don't think they're going to be on the last boss, right? Like that's crazy. You
Right.
have 20 people, and as soon as one person doesn't show up because classic, then all of a sudden you're in trouble. But
that did happen to us, by the way.
It sounds like this happened.
Yeah, it did.
But long term, it's like if you don't think that they're gonna make it on the roster, period, like they're not good enough, and or they don't fit in like personally, then it's like we don't need to necessarily keep you on the roster as like, you know, out of pity, right? It's not like, because then it's like you feel forced to put them in on farm bosses that you really don't even want to put them in on, because it's like you have other people that you want to trial and you want to see that they can do it, or you want to get the people that, you know, have been there all along, just more playtime because that's what they want. And yeah, it's doing everyone a disservice to keep people that you don't believe should be on the roster long term. Short term, I mean, obviously.
Usually we don't kick people in the middle of a tier, right? We usually, after each end boss dies, then the next week we start having conversations and, you know.
Yeah, there's exceptions, but it's, I mean, sometimes it's been clutch having people that you didn't think were going to make the roster and hold on for a little while so that they came in and were able to be valuable assets later in the raid. But that typically isn't the case, and it's just like a backup, and they're fine with, you know, the current situation. It's like they're not going to see the last couple bosses, whatever, and then, you know, make a decision after the tier whether they're going to stay or not, or they can make the same decision, right? It's like not like they're, you know, they can only raid here, they can't go anywhere else.
We certainly do not force people to remain in the guild. I don't think we have the technology to do that.
No, that one day. No,
but I think Tettles, your like model is something that a lot of guilds do use, right? Like of just never kicking people, just slotting them less and less if they think they're performing badly. And I don't think that doesn't work. I just think that like our way is better for pushing high ranks.
I mean, if it's a culture fit for the guild,
that's a good way to disagree.
I don't know. Like, if the person is like a good culture fit for the guild, and if he's friends with all the people in the guild, and that guild is like his home at the end of the day, and if he doesn't really want to go anywhere else, and he's still willing to put in the time, is there really any reason to kick him? Like,
yeah, because we don't want a roster that has 40 people on it. Like
that, yeah, the active roster, I wouldn't keep him on. Like,
we'll keep him friends and family.
We have a spreadsheet of like people that are going to be like potentials on every boss, right? I probably wouldn't put that person on that spreadsheet. You know, there might be someone that's willing to fit in, but.
Well, you're okay. So you're thinking of it. He's like the worst player of all time. Like, but think about it like this: if Mage is actually just like the most OP spec for one tier, he would be slotted into a few fights. But like it requires Mage to be like by far the best spec, like Ian Shadow Priest level bullshit.
Yeah, or Zool Subrogue, right? And we did this actually. Yeah. We brought in a friends and family rogue for Zool, like a raider that used to raid with us in Antorus. But I don't know. I think that like having that kind of slot in your guild of like, you know, bench raider, it requires you to have an actual like you have to pay some costs to do that. Like you have to give them stuff and do things with them.
There are a couple of people I would consider like having as that slot. It takes a very special kind of like they have to really just not care if they raid or not, like at all, because they probably won't.
Absolutely.
And if they do, then they're not gonna like being on the bench the whole time, because that's what they're gonna be. But if they're like just, you know, a ray of sunshine and I really like them, everyone really likes them, and they don't care at all, I wouldn't have a problem with them, you know, hanging out and being around. But it's just a really rare person, and I can only really think of one, maybe two, that I would consider that for, right? Like it's very, very rare.
Yeah, I've probably only known one or two of those my time in guilds too.
Yeah. I don't know. It's a tough question, because like the relationships of people within your guild is actually like it's part of your job as guild leadership to know about that and like see how people are slotting in, because if your people aren't happy, then that's a big problem, and it does factor like hugely into our decisions about who to keep on the roster going forward. Is like the tangible effect that they're going to have on our performance. We have like there have been apps that we haven't accepted because of what people have said about people's attitudes all the time. Actually,
everybody has that.
Yeah,
holy shit. Like I think the best reference is like the best reference for like a guild app is like word of mouth, like 100%.
Yeah, and people ask me this like when I'm streaming all the time. They're like, "What parse do I need to get it? Like, what does my Warcraft logs page need to look like to get into your guild?" And the answer is like, that's basically like the least important thing on the app. We'll use Warcraft logs to eliminate candidates sometimes, but we basically never use it as a like the thing that gets you in the guild.
I mean, for like top end guilds, as long as you have like an 80 or 90% average, you're probably fine to play. As long as you're like a good player mechanically, and you like fit in with the guild, then you're good to go.
Yeah,
but finding that the rest of that, like the 80-90 average, real easy to find. You find it in, guess what, 20% of players. That's what that means. But the rest of it, mechanical play, a lot harder to find on logs. You have to do some real deep dive to find the mechanical prowess on logs, and the raid fit's even harder.
One of our officers is working on a script to we feed an applicant's Warcraft logs page to it, and it will go through their like progression polls and see what killed them whenever they died, and it would just print out like a list of like the mechanics that killed them. That's gonna make it a lot easier for us.
Some stuff is like fine, and then dying to like.
And we do this manually. Like when we have apps that we are interested in, we'll actually go through their progression log. Like we'll click on their character, we'll go find not their kills, but like when they're progressing on a boss, and we'll see like how many times did this person get frozen in the intermission in Jaina? You know, how many times did this person die to Buster Cannon on Mechadork? How many times did they, die? Did they spread their disease on Orgozoa? I don't know how easy it is to see that. I don't know the Eternal Palace ones, mostly because we haven't really started getting these Eternal Palace apps yet, but that's going to be over the next couple of weeks that we'll start having the influx of those.
Yeah, usually try to like identify a couple things per fight, if possible, that I think are like really good to look for on the progression logs, as you said, because progression logs are what really matter. Like on the kill, like it's a kill. Like you killed the boss.
There's some people that like it's better to have bad damage on a progression kill. Like there are some people that are an indication that you're a good raider is if you have like low damage on your progression kill, it might mean that you were the person who got targeted by all the mechanics, and that was the reason you killed the boss, is because you were the person who lost all your damage to the mechanics on that pull. It's not like a big thing, but it is a factor, right? Like somebody who has high damage on all their progression pulls, and then on the kill they have low damage and were targeted by 5 bombs or whatever. That sort of thing does happen.
Got targeted by all the charges on Queen's Court, so you could actually do 0 DPS sometimes. So you actually have to fucking do mechanics and drop the charge at correct spot, something like that.
But yeah, identifying a couple of mechanics to look at, especially the ones that are easy to look at in logs, because we have a limited amount of time to spend looking through these logs, so part of it is optimizing that too.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, you could, if you want to search for every tiny little thing, like how often did that person get ticked by? Well, Ray of Frost is a bad example on Jaina, because that one you could really easily look for. But like every tick of bombard, not the bombard, but the fire on the boat, like as much as you
removing the fucking that wasn't removing the root, like every tick of bombard that wasn't removing the root,
but also wasn't when it was already a wipe, that kind of stuff. Right.
It can be really hard to filter out like what's legitimate, what's not, and some of it's like, I mean, you took a little bit of extra damage, whatever. Like some of it's not always a big deal. But then, like, you make some really game-breaking mistakes, like you baited the ray the wrong way. How do you search for that in a log? Like, you could look at every single replay of every single Jaina pull, and maybe eventually you'll see it. Like, oh, that's what did it. That pull 78 on night 3. That's you baited the wrong way.
You idiot.
Yeah.
It's too hard to look for that stuff, even though it is massively important that people are doing that correctly all the time. But you decide what you can look for quickly and easily.
You have to take a gamble with people, right? Like, since you can't do that, you have to take a guess. Like, you think they would have done that progression or not, and then you see over the next year how they do, right? And then decide from
every trial. Actually, every person that we slot on every fight is a gamble that they're going to be good. It's just the percentages, and our conviction that they're going to be good is different depending on how long we've known them and how much info we have on them. But yeah, every time we take on a trial, it's a guess.
Yeah, like that nerd Dratnos moving him from DPS to tank. Like, holy shit.
Oh, no, man. Yeah. Well, actually,
that's a big gamble.
That is something, though, that some people in guilds do, right, is they'll swap between roles and specs. And that's something you have to look out for, because there are some people that, like, that's a really big... That causes problems for some folks, right? Is that you'll see them just swap to some new class and be a lot worse at it. And sometimes the opposite happens. Sometimes somebody will swap to a new class and be way better at it, and that's always really great when that happens.
Yeah, definitely one of the cool things you can do, like between tiers especially, is sort of optimize like where you have people, because sometimes people are good multi-classers, right? Like I mean, myself, I played Brewmaster or Mage for the guild, occasionally healer, but that doesn't end well.
Yeah,
and
Mist Weaver
the Holy Paladin.
very briefly. Oh yeah, Bob Raffle, the Holy Paladin.
Yeah,
That
I
was-
remember that.
that was yucky.
Forgot about that.
And there was Who Plays DK XD, the Death Knight.
That was a bad.
That was a Mythic
none of the
Plus
tanks
guy, wasn't
yeah, oh, it was not. And there was
A little
OP
bit.
Fodham
That-
Tanker, the
no.
Guardian Druid, which that name has not aged
I
well.
played OP Bottom Taker, and my warrior name is Nerf Bears.
Nerf Bears, please. Yeah.
That name doesn't
doesn't
age
age well.
very well either.
Yeah.
Goddamn.
But
Wait, hold on. OP Bottom Tanker did have the world first Nelth Layer for like a
yes,
month,
he
right?
did. He did. He had it was like a 21 Nelth Slayer. It was the top Nelth Slayer of all time, and that was the only key I'd ever done on that character above like a 10 or 12 or something. So that went pretty good. No, but like playing tanks has never been a problem. Like there's a learning curve, but switching between tanks shouldn't be that terribly difficult. But switching roles can be, because it's entirely different, right? Like especially even going from like melee to range DPS or vice versa. Usually not. Range to melee is usually pretty easy. You just ook out and do damage. It's fine.
Yeah. You just turn off half your brain that you had turned on to play ranged.
The one that tells you to stop moving, you just turn that off, and you
Yeah.
can just move all you want. But like it's a lot of different responsibilities and paradigms that you need to get used to. Like if you're going from tank to DPS, it can be difficult because it could be like you're used to just you need to keep up certain abilities, and you might be good at a rotation, but especially if you're going to a caster, like the always be casting paradigm, it's not something that you just get right away unless you are doing it all the time, and that can be difficult for people. Melee to range, also the same thing. Always be casting. You need to really ingrain that in yourself to get good at it. But going from DPS to tank can be equally difficult. Like you might be good at always be casting, but that doesn't necessarily save your life or make you a good tank, because it's not always the job of the tank to do huge dam, right? Sometimes you need to be positioning the boss correctly, and there can be a lot of really intricate positioning, especially think about like Zakul, where you are constantly moving the boss to deal with the tentacles, the puncture, and then you need to face it the right way during when the split's about to happen so that the ad's on the inside and you can actually kill it. Like the delirium ad, which only 4 people can hit. If that's on the outside of the room where, it's purple crap on the ground, you can't be out there, it's going to die slower. And having 4 people on that makes that kind of an issue. So having a lot of spatial awareness and being able to prioritize like positioning and stuff like that makes a good tank. And that's not a skill set that range need to do.
Yeah, I think positioning has got to be the hardest part about transitioning to play tank, because that's something that people just don't normally think about. They kind of just follow the boss unless they know it needs to be in a specific spot for themselves, for their damage. And that's because the tanks can take care of that part of the mechanic, kind of like healers can take care of the healing. You don't have to think about it too much as DPS. But watching a DPS player swap to tank and have to position a boss in a tricky way and then realize that the boss doesn't move very often, like Jaina, is just the most funny thing to me.
Oh yeah, dude,
Or-
that moment where you're like, I need to move this boss, and it just starts a 10-second cast sequence where it's not moving,
Yeah.
and you're just like, no. This happens with like Peacekeepers and Motherload as well. The Sanguine pool
The
drops
Sanguine.
beneath it, and you're like, okay, let's get it out of here, and it's just like, shield time.
And starting in WoD 2, it's like any small boss, it's like you and the boss on ice. Woo! It's like you can skate around all over the place, and especially I don't know if anyone played like Tyrant Belhari. Like, you try to
Where it
move
just like
that
walks
boss,
behind you, right?
and it's just like, what are you doing over there?
I think it's the small humanoid model things, because Jaina was like that too, where you like take a small sidestep and she just fucking like launches herself, just like fucking across the room. You're just like, what?
It is definitely the small models. Like big model bosses, it's no problem, right? Like, and that's
Yeah.
most of the bosses in Eternal Palace. It's not a big deal; they won't escape. But the small bosses, you got to be really careful, man. Those things are real.
I remember the mini bosses in Court of Stars, I think it was, did the same thing. I was so frustrated with those for a while, where you'd move 1 inch and they would just swing around the corner and then AoE your whole group. And
The
you're trying to
freehold,
LOS them.
the freehold boss of the the captain's the one that throws the blade and does the thing. Positioning that guy.
Trying to get that guy to pick up his sword. Yeah, is the sword just coming at you and it gets through him and
He's
it's
like,
still going. Yeah.
Especially when it knocked you, 10 miles because it scaled key level. That was great.
Oh yes, Trail, do tell.
In season 1, like it's already hard enough to not reset that boss because if you step on any rock or bench or literally anywhere in the arena but the middle, it might reset.
Oh,
and then in season 1,
good.
if he threw the blade at you and you got hit by the blade, you'd go a mile in the air and he'd reset from that too. So you could reset him in like 12 different ways. So I was just like so mad at that boss all the time.
Speaking of the Z-axis, because this is something that the game has constantly gotten wrong, and this is something that we've kind of discovered over the past couple weeks, I'd say, but it might not be something that everybody watching or listening to this knows. The Tides emissaries actually only apply their aura to stuff that is at or above their level on the Z-axis. So if you bring a Tide emissary up some stairs, the stuff below it will be interruptible and stunnable and stuff. Or like
I don't think it's above. I think it's anything above or below is not affected.
It can be weird, yeah.
So that was a recent change. That was either this week or like last week that they changed that, and that's because there was an emissary of the Tides in the Motherlode Courtyard that was making stuff.
The Waycrest Courtyard, yeah.
Motherlode, yeah, Waycrest, the Waycrest Courtyard, because you'd like bring some like guards or captains or something like that, any of the trash over it, and it instantly be CC immune. There's no Tides. You're just like, where the fuck is this coming from?
And it's below you, yeah.
No, there's the 2 witches and the thorn guards that are right in the middle of the courtyard in Waycrest. And on bolstering week, there was a Tides right beneath them, and so people would go try to sap them or CC them so they could pull the hounds away and not bolster them. And they're like, wait, we can't sap them because there's a Tides aura on them, and there's not a Tides in the courtyard. It's beneath it. So then, yeah, it must have gotten fixed because of that.
But yeah, so now you can, like, the Abyssal, the eels, the 16 eels before Lord Stormsong and Shrine, when that has a Tides in it, if you just pull that Tides up onto a bench, you can then AoE CC everything.
Another nice thing is in Seth Rallis, the fucking Tides are at the bottom of the stairs. If you get the Dust Devil up, like, one of the fucking stairs, bro, it's kickable. And it's like, what?
Yeah.
Same thing with Undera, the slopes on Cragmaw's room on the sides. If you put the Tides above the pack, you can kick everything.
So that's
really cool interactions.
That's some new technology that we're sharing here with you to help make the Tides easier. What in practice this I expect will happen with this is you'll just like struggle to try and actually move the Tides separately from the pack, and you'll die before you actually get it in the right spot, but.
It could be pretty easy with like a Ring of Peace
Ring of Peace makes it so you don't even have to pull the Tides, but
well, sure, you could like Typhoon it though, like up some stairs a little bit, and then all of a sudden you can, and then you just stand between it.
Well, with the Dust
engineering
Devil,
knock belt as well.
Yeah, with the Dust Devil and Seth Rallis, it's actually not even fucking protected whenever you pull it, so you literally just don't move it at all, and it just stands there. It's like, what the hell? This is so dumb.
All right, let's return from that diversion to talking about raid leading. So raid leading is a different thing than guild leading, right? And this can be done by different people. For a while in Parse Culture, you were our raid leader, and Matty Smite was our guild leader, and so he was kind of in charge of like the bigger picture stuff, and you guys would kind of coordinate on the roster, but that was also still a lot of his domain. And then within the raid itself, you were the person who was kind of calling stuff and that, right?
It definitely a little more split than that. I actually think so. I had more reign in the guild leadership department, and he, after he'd seen a fight long enough, he'd start taking over like the raid leading calls, especially. But raid leading has a lot of responsibilities from, even before the raid starts or even before it comes out. The raid leader is responsible for quite a bit of stuff. Like it's doing the research on the fights and acquiring the weak auras that may not necessarily the big packages that everyone has, like move out for this ability, like that's easy. But there's like specific weak auras that are going to help you. Like there's a bunch of different ones on Ishara that ended up being huge for us. But lots of fights have weak auras that aren't necessarily part of the big package, but are really, really helpful. Unat also had many weak auras that we used for that boss, and even going like closer to the actual night that we're raiding, you're deciding if we're going on to a new boss. You're like, okay, well, what's gonna be the problem for this boss, right? Because you could just go into a boss blind and start hitting it and see what's killing you, but it's gonna slow you down quite a bit. So you got to decide, okay, what's actually going to be the problem in advance. You might not always be right about it, or it might not be like in the way you expect it, but you can anticipate that and try to come up with counters to those problems ahead of time. And that's what a good raid leader or leaders do. I kind of want to break into raid leading is not a solo job ever. I mean, in my opinion, almost never is a raid leader going to be doing all this alone, because there's so much you can be doing, and it's not just making the calls and calling people idiots in the middle of a poll, because I mean, that might be one person's job, but it's certainly not it's certainly not the only job of a raid leader, because I mean, there's making individual calls, like, that are just reminders, basically, right? Like, you're reminding people that, hey, this ability is coming up and you need to do this, and that might be important when you're first learning the fight. Eventually people start to get it, and then it's just background music to keep you on cadence, right? It's like, that's coming up, okay, whatever, I know that. And then sometimes it's like judgment calls, right? Like, you need to move a certain place, and like Ashbane, this was really apparent, where you need to move the boss or position the bubbles on that boss.
Yeah, so these are like actual calls that, like, the call to like whether to soak or let them hit the boss in Ashvane, the call to like which direction to move Zakul, those sorts of things, which are not, you don't just call those based on a big Wigs timer. Those are like, you actually have to look at the situation and make a decision.
Where the tentacles are coming from, and shit like that.
That one is like kind of just reading a truth in the room versus so where the tentacles are coming from is something that you can call just by like observing it correctly, and that's an important job. But then from that, the decision gets made of where to bring the boss, and there's always two directions you can move Zakul, and you just have to figure out which of those is better in a really quick way.
You could also move to the middle of the room, but
that's a really bad place to move it. Yeah.
Yeah, and those vary on pole to pole, and so you need to be internalizing what it means to make that call, and kind of deciding on a rule that, like, or a set of rules for what you want to call a certain situation. Like on Ashvane, it's like, okay, we want to move the boss here, we want to put the bubbles about 10 yards ahead. Sometimes you just want to drop it right on top of the boss, sometimes you want to move it ahead, sometimes you want to soak like 3 bubbles, or there's 2 bubbles on that fight.
Yeah, there's the briny bubbles and the rippling waves. Okay,
rippling waves. Sometimes you want to soak 3 rippling waves and let the rest come in. And then sometimes you need to like move the barrier ahead of the boss, and then everyone needs to go to it, because otherwise you're going to get upsurges in it. But there's a lot of variables that you need to account for when making judgment calls, and that's that can be an important job.
So are you more for democratic, like shot calling and raid leading, then, as opposed to just like one person doing the whole entire thing?
I think that one person should start doing the whole thing, and then if you find things that like need to be called, but you don't have the best view for, or like it's something that maybe a tank controls more. Like on Ashvane, Snap started doing the calls on where we're going to put the briny bubbles, right? Because he's the one controlling it. He's the one that's going to get bubbled. So he's the one that ultimately decides where the first one should go, and where the boss is going. So he was a good person to make that call. That kind of happens organically as we progress on a fight.
Yeah, on Ajara, we had a healer start taking the responsibility of like calling the dispels in on the arcane bursts, and that works really nicely because that's something that healers look at.
Yeah, and you can piece those out to different people just based on if they can do it easily or not. And most of the time it was me on most fights, but then you just, what makes sense to give out to other people, it's a good thing to do. You kind of soften the load on one person and let them focus on a couple things that might be still very important, and let other people focus, and it makes it so that you don't get overloaded, because it is easy to get overloaded with a lot of mechanics happening all at once.
I think there are some guilds where like a raid leader thinks that they have to call everything and doesn't let other people step in to lessen that burden, and that's a really bad thing to happen. I think it's important that like if you're on a fight and somebody is offering to call something and they're going to do a good job at it, like you let them start taking that responsibility, because that usually means that like the reason they're offering to call it is because it either needs to be called, or you're currently doing a bad job of calling it because you're doing so much stuff outside of that. That happened on like Zakul, right? Zakul Tentacles. Eve started calling that because he didn't have other stuff to look at, and you did have other stuff to look at.
And also, I found myself as a ranged player, and this was wrong, and I know it now, but I was further away from the boss. So like I was then making like a judgment call and like having to do some geometry on.
Yeah.
Okay, is I actually gonna go through the boss? Which eventually I got better at it, but like the first night of pulls, it was like I was not doing a good job of doing that geometry. It was we were getting hit by the x-axis, and you know, people were asking why, and I couldn't answer.
It's definitely important to let people stand up though and start taking that job if they can do it.
Yeah, this is especially true in the most apparent to me, at least anyway, in healing cooldowns. Like, I think part of the job of raid leader is sort of assigning those ahead of time, but also you need to like keep people doing them, right? Because it's one thing to just say you're supposed to do this here and put it on a spreadsheet, and it's a very important thing to do. But then like sometimes you're going to vary that a little bit, like maybe small adjustments here or there. Like I think on Orgazo we made a lot of these where it's like, okay, maybe we should move this barrier like 10 seconds earlier. The spreadsheet's no longer up to date, so we got to start calling this stuff. And I think it's overwhelming to do like calling the rest of the fight and then start calling healing cooldowns too, because I have a hard time watching
definitely
healing cooldowns while watching the rest of the fight as well, because I'm also watching players. Like I'm seeing, you know, if everyone's doing the job correctly, and I'll usually if you watch our raids, like you'll hear me call someone making a mistake as they're making it, because that's what I'm doing. I'm watching people, and it's hard to do that and watch, you know, healing bars as well, healing cooldowns. So
yeah, I think delegation is super important, and you have to do the correct amount of delegation, right? You can't have too many people calling, but you got to have enough to make it easy for everyone calling to do their jobs without screwing up themselves.
Yeah, you don't want multiple people talking at once, as we are doing now.
Yeah.
That's
yep, exactly like that.
a bad thing to have happen in a raid environment, because then people will stop hearing the important things. So you kind of have to figure out what the most important thing to talk about is, and then let that be what's talked about. A really clear example of this was like Mechatork, when people were in the robots calling out colors. You need everybody else to be quiet. Like, there's nothing that's more important than having those people do that job, and that needs to be done over voice comm, so like everything else takes a back seat. But you kind of have to figure this out. Like, is it more important for our healers to be talking right now about healer stuff? Or like, do we need to be talking to the tank about where to move the boss? Or do we need to is there nothing that's important enough to bother everybody by having overcoms? Like, that's a thing. You don't have to have the discussion in those terms, but that is when you do have multiple people talking, the way you solve it is by answering that question in your head.
Yeah, definitely. And Mechatork's a good example where everyone just had to shut up. If people were talking, it usually ended real badly. I know a couple times where, you know, some people, definitely not me, were responsible for causing some of those wipes. But,
yeah, we'd have some banter going on in the middle of the poll. That's a bad boss to banter on. That boss is banned from banter.
No banter allowed. We're going there tonight because
not tonight. We don't raid tonight.
Oh right, we don't raid.
Yeah, right. We changed our raid times, by the way. This is our first week of new raid times, so I wonder how many people are going to log on expecting there to be raid tonight.
Yeah, it's actually tripping me out. I'm not making an announcement, but yeah, there's definitely times where it's like, also you start a fight making certain calls, and it's like you realize this isn't necessary. Like Unet, there was a couple of these where it was like when he started the cast of the thing that the Grand Shrine, whatever it was called, it's not called Grand Shrine, but the spread out mechanic with the colors. Like I would say soon you need to spread out, but then I wouldn't like be like, okay, he's casting it now. Okay, he finished casting. Like that's what weak auras are for. You can cover some of those calls with like a weak aura that's like, you know, blaring in your ears that it's casting. They can figure it out.
Having good weak auras generally makes you a better raider. I always like to put focus down cues in mind, because that stuff like.
Yeah, and that's something that like it's everybody in our guild is kind of responsible for having a weak aura setup that like alerts them to those sorts of mechanics as needed, but we make sure to share like particularly good ones and everything before boss fights and whatever we can.
There will be like some weak auras that are like pivotal, like the Ashara like stacks debuff, and then like stuff, I guess like Fallen Avatar stacks too, like whenever you're like soaking stuff like that.
That was especially egregious. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, like a bunch of stuff like that is always very important to have weak auras for.
Yeah, so those are kind of there are some weak auras that like you need all
Are
20 people
mandatory.
in your raid to have the same weak aura so that you can do the fight mechanic that the weak aura holds your hand through.
The maiden
Maiden.
vigilance in particular.
Yeah.
That was
delete, boss, delete.
But Ajara intermission is actually a perfect example of this. Like our Ajara intermission weak aura is just like it just tells you like go stand on this world marker, and like the weak aura does all the work for you figuring out the world marker. So if you have one person in your raid who either doesn't have or doesn't understand the weak aura, which we did when we lost our player to Classic, and we had somebody come in to replace them for the night. It's immediately apparent like just how much that weak aura was holding things together until we could get them sorted out on using it as well. But then there are a bunch of mechanics like the Unot spread thing where each of the 20 people in your raid can have a different solution that like, you know, I might want an air horn blared at you or blared at me. You might want just like the big wigs timer. That might be enough
Big
for
wig
you.
alert,
And somebody else might just like know the timings or always be spread, or they might be a melee so they don't need a solution anymore after the nerf because melee shouldn't have to do mechanics. And that's, you know, all of those work, right? 20 different solutions for 20 different people is fine.
Yeah. Sometimes it is like just one emergent thing just seems better than the rest. Like I know there's a weak aura for the actual colors on that fight that got passed around that made a sound, right? Like it was like the storm made like a storm sound, the ocean made like a water drop, and then the void had like a foghorn sound to it or something like that, ship horn. But I mean, like those
that was
sounds
really
became
good. Yeah.
very good for a lot of people I know because I'm sure most people used it. Maybe some people didn't. Maybe they were the ones that kept on crashing. But you know, for at least the people I've talked to, it was very good. So having, I guess it's overall like having a good UI is hugely important in your play, and weak auras are a pivotal part of that. So
And
We actually started using that, and then we stopped because people were trolling because they would look at like the weak aura color and get confused with what color they actually had, so they would run into the wrong thing. So we just all stopped using that. It was because you would yell out, "I'm blue" and "I'm green," but then like the trident and the water, or the trident and the crown aren't necessarily like,
the /say bubbles or whatever.
Yeah,
we said no say bubbles.
We completely turned that off, especially because like shadow priests are like spouting gibberish.
Yeah,
so
they're
you
just
don't
like
even know what they're saying.
zuck,
Oh man, those are the worst.
yeah.
the
Suck,
say
suck.
bubbles
What
were
are you?
good. The fucking air horn that was associated with that weak aura was bad. So yeah, that's good.
Yeah, everybody had a different opinion on this, and there are some things where you'd have to standardize it across your guild, right? Like, it's important that you don't just have, like, 10 people in your guild using say bubbles and 10 people not using say bubbles. You kind of need that to be 20-0 in either direction. Yeah. Okay. I guess one thing that people who watch our raids might also notice is that from time to time you do get a little bit heated, Jason, at different moments. There's passion in our raiding and atmosphere. I don't know if you want to talk about like this kind of role of like getting loud, calling out particular people. Is that something that because I know some guilds don't do that at all, but do you have an analytical approach for that, or is that just sometimes the rage gets the better of you, you start seeing red?
I can't say that never happens, and I certainly don't premeditate every time I yell. If like, all right, if I yell at this decibel level, I'll get everyone to be just really good for the rest of the night. It's perfect. And occasionally it does work out that way, but it's okay. So going into a fight, like, and that's a hard fight. Usually, I'm pretty patient with people learning mechanics. I think people would generally say that I'm not quick to anger when we're figuring things out. But once we've figured things out, once we know what's going on, I can get a little mauled sometimes, and that's part of it's because like I have a lot of personal, I guess not necessarily
expectations of your raiders. I'm sure
expectations. Yeah, it's not exactly like self-worth, but I have a lot of value placed in how the raid does as a whole, like how it reflects on me personally.
Right, as the person who chose for these 20 people to be in the fight, like when somebody else screws up, it's kind of your screw up for bringing them in if they're like being a real drag on progression.
Absolutely, and it's not necessarily like an outward-facing thing. It's like to the people in the raid, I feel bad when I make bad decisions, like as far as like who's in or not. And that's you can stay up all night, talking about things that you screwed up and should have done better, and how it kind of frustrates you that you did that to the people in your guild, because it's like those are people that you care about and want to succeed as well. It's not just an outward like I want to be top 10 on US WoW progress. it's not always what factors into that. But you make the decisions ultimately that lead to. Not everything is your fault as like a raid leader. You're gonna wipe plenty of times to many different bosses, to many different mechanics, and that's part of the experience. It's when people are really slow to learn, and sometimes we had a example the other night where it's like we had a solution figured out to a problem that we were having, which was like people were getting beckoned to the boss during the phase 3 when the ads come out, and they were getting mind controlled. And so we figured out, okay, so when the beam's going this way, we have to actually go all the way over here and those people have to use a gateway to get across, right, and get away from the boss. That was our solution to the problem, and it was stated as such. Everyone knew what that solution was and how to do it. And then when people come along afterwards and they're like, I didn't know how to do it, it's like, we really can't have people not knowing what to do when that was a huge problem for us, and we all figured out as a collective how to solve it and what the solution was. It was and I tend to get frustrated and angry when people don't take responsibility for that. If it's like, I screwed up, I should have gotten there, it's like, okay, whatever, it's easy to just drop it. But when people refuse to take responsibility for that misplay, which is what it ultimately is, or they just are completely clueless on what they're supposed to do, and that's a whole other problem.
Which means they weren't listening, right, or they weren't paying attention.
Yeah.
That's what would anger me personally.
And it's not about being angry so much as you're trying to fix the future problems, right? So the thing that really causes this to that necessitates you getting loud and trying to break through to somebody is when you realize that if you don't do something, this is going to keep happening, right?
That's definitely part of it, and I mean, there is a little bit of passion and fire to it.
Of course,
it wouldn't exist if I wasn't actually at least a little bit frustrated or mauled. But it's definitely sometimes it's a very effective tool because people maybe they aren't paying attention or they whatever. But if they get raged at a little bit, then it's like, oh, okay, well, what was I supposed to do? Oh, this, okay, I got it. and then it's better. Sometimes it's overboard, and I know that sometimes this happens to me, and it happens to other leaders I've seen, where you have a tendency to sometimes overdo it, and that can be a problem too, because there is a line, and you try not to cross it. Usually it's fine to get a little bit loud, but if you start riding someone just for a long time, overbearing on one specific person in particular, it can get bad. They can get demoralized completely, and that doesn't help anyone. They just start playing poorly because all of a sudden no one likes me and I suck and I feel bad, and I'm just, I guess that's how it is.
Do you see that happening a lot where people just aren't okay with people yelling in your guild, or you getting frustrated like that?
No, generally speaking, the people coming here know the environment, and I think I do a pretty good job of doling it out to a wide variety of people, so
sure.
that someone doesn't feel like I'm just constantly picking on them. And if I am constantly picking on them, chances are I'm probably going to try to sit them because they're playing badly enough that I'm picking on them a whole night.
Yeah.
And so usually it's spread out. Every once in a while, I'll get on someone that probably doesn't deserve it, and I'll usually apologize or back off of it because it sometimes can be too much. But
also, we have been known to have times where you've gotten mad at everybody and it's been your fault, or it's been there was one time. There's one time on Agrimar where we were selling Agrimar kills, and we just all the ads just died immediately on the kill, and we Jason was just he's so mad at the entire raid.
Look at it!
Yeah.
What are you guys doing?
And it turns out the buyer had just AoE'd them to all heck. The buyer had done 80% of the damage to these ads.
I was like, how did Jason AoE then?
Yeah.
Terrified. That makes more sense.
I had to issue a raid-wide apology. I'm very, very sorry to everyone. Promise not to ever get mad again.
Yeah.
It didn't hold up, but I was sorry, and then we told the buyer not to do that. It was fine. So yeah, we fixed the problem. So yelling.
Yeah,
We might not have found out who did it if I didn't get.
Yeah,
it.
if you didn't yell, we might have just all assumed.
Whoops.
Yeah, it was somebody. Oops, and just keep going. Try again. Yeah.
Whoopsie doopsie.
What was he playing?
Frost Death Knight. It was Frost Scythe. All the guy was just on Iron. He was just Frost Scythe in those ads. Yeah.
I was thinking Demon Hunter.
So wait, he was sitting out at range.
Yeah, he was just out there. He's like, well, there's one target here, and there's 8 targets here, and I've selected this talent that does damage based on the number of targets in front of me. I'll go where there's 8 targets.
He really is just doing some simple math, so I appreciate that.
All right, let's transition a little bit to kind of a final subtopic here, which is talking about Mythic Plus, because that's something where obviously, Jason, you've kind of I wouldn't say like led, but you have led MDI teams, right? There have been MDI teams where it's kind of been your team mostly, and Trell also, you have experience in this where like your MDI team, I guess as the tank, there's kind of some inherent amount of leadership you have as the person who's creating the polls, like I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Trell,
Even though it's not I'm not the captain at the moment, I still do a significant portion of the leading because I'm the tank. I'm sure Jason has done that in the past as well.
Yeah, definitely. Both of my MDI teams, like obviously it's not just one person like raid leading, everyone's contributing, but the tank is generally setting the pace, or especially the initial pace, and then you can be like, can we do more? Do we need to do less? That can be a whole group decision, but the tank's usually the starting play.
Yeah. So do you think that like leadership, it kind of works best if the tank is the main person in charge? Because like Method NA was formed by J.B, right? He's kind of the leader role in that team.
Yeah, he's team captain. He definitely sets their practice schedule for sure. I can tell by the way they work. But beyond that, I'm sure Nerf does a huge amount of the leading mid-key. I know probably all of them help call mechanics at certain points. And each team is like that. Like one leader will do a lot of the outside work and help motivate. Some other person on the team will probably...
Generally, it's the tank inside the key, right? That's doing the like actual mid-key shot calling. Like there's kind of not a good way around that. There are a few spots where you can delegate that responsibility on some pulls or bosses, but like in an M+ environment, it's so tank centric.
Well, it really just depends on. I mean, it'll probably be like this to an extent where every pull or boss you go into is a different kind of dynamic. Where one pull we do in MDI, I mean, most pulls are really big in MDI settings, right? So there's a lot going on. People need to pay attention to quite a few details. Most of the time, the tank can call a specific order if need be of kicks or movements or whatever where people are going to be standing. That's a really common thing. Other times, it's really beneficial for a DPS player to call kicks because it's a lot easier fight for them. Like, I guess maybe the second boss of Shrine might be that case in some situations.
Galvast.
Yes, Galvast.
That's something that it's often good to have a DPS call. I don't know. It depends on who your DPS are. Well, that's one thing I've noticed whenever I do keys with like Evade. He's a DPS that just calls like an absurd amount of stuff when he's DPSing, and then when he's tanking, he lets DPS call a lot of stuff as well.
Exactly, and me and Evade have an understanding. Like, and if I plug a temple with a different group, I'll ask the DPS players, "Hey, can anyone call Galv? If not, I'll do it. But it's probably best if one of you do it." You know, and it's just like raid leading to an extent where there's certain things that a raid leader should choose to do or delegate out to the group, and vice versa, where the tank should do it no matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely, and sometimes it's like affix based too, right? Like if a tank is leading the key, like calling all the kicks during a sanguine necrotic key, you're gonna have kind of a bad time, right? Like you need someone to kind of step up while you handle everything else because all of a sudden the rest of the dungeons become massively difficult for you. And yeah, I definitely agree. It depends on like Dr. J's team is led by him of DPS always. Like he's always making basically every call, kicks, CC, all of that stuff, and has been for a long time. So it can definitely just vary. But I would say tanks are pretty good at like deciding when they're going to pull extra things in, or like they set the pace basically, and then how you make the micro calls during the pulls can definitely vary from group to group.
Especially in pug groups, like a tank usually leads the majority of it because the people aren't used to playing together and they don't really know exactly what to expect. But in MDI pulls and really practice situations, sometimes it's completely silent because everyone knows exactly what they're going to do, when it's going to happen, who's going to kick what cat. And sometimes we even make weak auras. Like my team for the second boss of Shrine, we have a weak aura system where it just tells people when their kick is up, so we can be silent and focus, which I think was a really good idea, and I'm glad we did that.
Is
But
that
it
one
just
of the nameplate
totally depends on
anchors?
the
Or I know that sounds like you could use that for a lot of stuff. The nameplate.
Oh yeah, anchors interrupt order to mob. We've used that since Battle of Zarlor on a bunch of different fights where it just like it anchors a number on
Jaina
top of
kicks.
the it was we did it Jaina, we did it on Unat, we did it on Crucible, we did it on Orgazoa.
It's so important to have that.
And it just like puts a little number above the mob and it like rings when it's your turn because you just go into custom options and change to say like what number kick you are. Yeah, exporting those kind of weak auras to an MDI setting is definitely huge.
It's just funny to think about like take an Underrot pull in Kragmaw's room on live keys where it's like 5 mobs, but someone needs to call kicks on flowers, like assign kicks each flower, and then someone's kicking the screamer, and then someone needs to stun the maggot. And then that's only 5 mobs, and there's like tons of communication. Then you move to an MDI setting where there's like 4 times the amount of mobs in the pull, and it's just silent because everyone knows exactly what's going to happen. No one has to call anything, and it's either they die or we die.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, that's the double unholy death knight shit, right? Where you're over pulling now.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we'll see a lot of that this weekend in the Cup.
Absolutely looking forward to that. All right, let's close out our show this week by answering some questions from our friends in Discord and on Twitter. Every week, you can always go into our Discord and ask us questions. We'll tell you what the topic is beforehand, so you can ask us questions on the topic, and also we'll tweet it out, or you can just ask us general questions, and we'll answer a set of both of those types of things. So our first question comes from Gyu on Discord, who asks, how do you find the balance on bringing main raiders and people that bench for bosses that are on semi-farm? So, like, I know this boss is like Ashvane was when we were 7 of 8, or even when we were working on Ajara and we were reclearing Ashvane, like that kind of thing, or Orgazoa. Like, how do you decide who comes in on these semi-farm bosses while you're still doing progression?
Yeah, I mean, we even did some of that on like the first 3 bosses. If you go look at our first kills on the very first night, we had people that probably didn't see any of the next 5 bosses because, a lot of it comes down to who needs what off each boss. You don't necessarily know if they're going to be in. If you know for sure they're not going to be in, it's a much easier decision. It's more like, okay, if no one else needs the boss, then you can throw them in. But it's like Ashvane and Orgazoa were tricky because it's like
those are hard bosses, right? Yeah, like
they're hard and they have dropped a really, really important trinket. And it's like, then even if someone gets the trinket and no longer needs the boss, you want them in so they can get another trinket and trade it to someone else. Or they could be like our Boomkin and healer. They get a 455 socketed trinket and can't trade it. So
yeah, we have 2 455 socketed corals in our raid, and they're on a healer and a Boomkin.
Holy shit, bro, that's awful.
Yeah.
But early on, it's pretty easy, like, because not everyone needs the first 3 bosses, right? Like, that's some people do, but you can usually kind of start to fit people in there. And it's like, it's not, I wouldn't do it if there's like a really important piece of loot. Like if Radiance dropped like the dribbling Ichor trinket, I would not ever sit like an agility or strength user for that boss. Like, they would always be in because it's an easy boss and it has loot that's going to be massively good for the rest of the tier. So, I mean, until everyone had that trinket, it wouldn't even be a decision. But it's not really the case for most of the early bosses. They don't drop crazy loot. Their Azurite might be good for some, but it's not required for others. So you just kind of on a case by case. We do a spreadsheet or a form rather, where everyone's like, for each boss, do they need it, and it's like, how big is the upgrade, and then based on that, we put together a roster. And once we've decided, we only have 16 people that need the boss, then we can start fitting in other people.
Yeah, and I think something that you were kind of hitting on, but didn't hit on it directly, is like your gear funneling to people who are going to be on later progression fight. So if the people who are going to be in on the progression fights later on need the fight, then they should 100% be in. If they don't need it, then you should try to get like dribbling Ichors or ink pods or whatever else on those people. So it just kind of varies. There's also this like chalk funneling too. They have to kind of think of sometimes. There's also a lot of like random stuff, random nuance that you have to think of.
Yeah, you can min-max more or less. We min-max pretty hard. One thing that we basically don't consider is like if somebody wants the boss to have gear for themselves for like Mythic Plus, or just because they want their character to be more geared. Like, we don't really consider that until we're done with progression. We're like, we kind of expect everybody who's on the roster to not have that be a priority that's like a deal breaker for them. But for some guilds that like you need to make that consideration because you're going to lose people off your roster if you don't give them gear and get them in on boss fights that they want. But we kind of have this culture here where like, you know, if you're not in for Azshara, you kind of aren't gonna, you can't really rely on being in on any other boss fight, because we're like, our guild's goal is to kill Azshara, and everything is working towards that until Azshara dies. And then once we're on farm, yeah, we'll get you whatever pieces you want from the boss fights eventually.
Parses too. I know some people actually care about that.
Yeah.
I know it used to be something I cared about too, but it eventually like just kind of stopped. Some people care, and they can get it after last boss is dead. I don't. At that point, it's fine, go nuts. But until then, I really couldn't care less.
Yeah, so that kind of thing, it depends on your guild's culture, whether or not you have those things be a factor during progression, but you'll progress faster if you don't. All right, next question comes from @Noelcrafty, who asks, what do you think is the easiest role to raid lead from? I became my guild's impromptu raid leader and swapped to Beast Mastery Hunter from Melee so I could see everything going on easier, but I'm not sure if that's the best option. So Jason, you've swapped, and some of your swapping has been based on the theory that it'd be easier to raid lead. You swapped from tank to mage, actually, because of this theory, partially, right? What's your opinion on that, Bean?
Well, I do want to preface this with saying there's not 100% right answer. I'd say what you're most comfortable with playing is going to be the best for when you're raid leading. But if you have time to learn something and get used to it, like especially at the end of a tier, it's a great time to make a swap, because then you can pick something up and get used to it. The like mechanical, muscle memory with the spec is massively important, especially if you're going to be trying to do like calls and stuff like that, because it's not going to be you can, as long as you're getting like 85% of your class out while you're raid leading, that's a good setup. But if you're trying to like hunt and peck your keys while you're making calls, you're going to suck at everything. So that, just start there. I do think that every role has, aside from Melee, unfortunately, every role aside from Melee has its own advantages. Melee is the advantage of you get to ook, I guess. That's
Melee is probably the one where you can do the best job while still making calls. Like Melee is the easiest of the roles, right, to do, really.
Yeah. It makes it so that you can just ook out and watch timers. That's cool, but you also see less of the boss arena, and if that matters for making judgment calls, then it could be bad. Like Ashvane, you try to turn your camera around, all of a sudden you're like staring into the floor because the camera sucks when you're right up against the wall. Or you're
like trying to look through the boss's body because it's too big.
Yeah,
right. And that happens all the time. Range don't typically have that problem. So I'd say like tanks have the immediate impact of being able to move the boss where they want to. And so if you're calling out where people need to go, you are taking them there. Like you're leading them on that journey. You're not like dictating to the tank who then has to move and then everyone else goes with it. So you're cutting out a step there. The same problem with Melee, you don't really get a good view of the boss room. So it can be hard to make calls while you're doing that. And tanking, often with the positioning requirements on some of these bosses, it can be a lot if you're trying to also make judgment calls and reminder calls for people. If you're trying to do all that, and some people do it, like some people are just amazing and they're incredible raid leaders as a tank. I think it's easier to do as a range DPS because you have none of the responsibility of a tank. You basically you press your buttons. Once you get good enough at a class, like most of your stuff is rotational, right? You have some reactionary things to worry about, but most of it's pretty straightforward and you can do very easily with practice. Healers, I think, are probably the hardest to do it on, just because like they're so reactionary. They're constantly watching health bars, and I think what they are good at is managing healing cooldowns. But as I kind of alluded to earlier, you can split that off onto a different person than someone who's making the rest of the calls. Like they could be excellent at watching all the healer cooldowns and calling them on the fly. I've known people that did that. Former GM of Parse Culture was very good at it. He was excellent. We wouldn't even assign healing cooldowns. He'd just call them when he wanted them. and that worked for him.
That's
'cause
fucking insane. Holy shit.
he was really good at it. That was, you know, he was excellent. And so part of eventually you get used to it. Like, he'll start calling them in the same spots every time, but that's what he would do going into a fight. But you have a very limited view of the fight. I'd call it like a macro view of the fight, where most of what you're looking at is health bars and sometimes timers, but usually you just worry about, you know, when's the damage coming, when the ramp, etc., like that, and then you worry about doing cooldowns. At range DPS is generally the easiest. To get back to the question, BM Hunter is
Great
probably
choice. Yeah.
probably the best choice because you don't have to sit there and cast, so you actually don't have to worry about your positioning hardly at all. You get to ook out as a ranged player. It's probably the best of both worlds as far as like DPS raid leading goes. If I were to switch to any class for raid leading purposes, to be the, you know, best raid leader possible, it'd probably be BM Hunter. So as long as you can get good at it, it's going to be worth it, probably.
And like you always have to think like raid leaders are going to lose a little bit of their rotation because they're focusing on so much. BM hunters don't lose hardly any damage from moving, so that's got to be the best choice for range.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind. It's like, as much as it might, you know, have some minor complexities, they're still just rotational and you can get used to it. But being able to move, like, even as a mage, right? Like, there's a lot of times where I could get in trouble if I was playing like a shaman or a warlock, because I will not necessarily focus on my positioning as much. And it's like, oh, it's fine, I'll just blink. No big deal.
Yeah.
But like, putting yourself in like the shoes of most healers, especially, they don't have those gap closing tools or repositioning tools. Even most DPS don't. BM Hunter has everything going for it, so it's a good choice.
All right, I think that about does it for us here this week. There's a bunch of great questions that we weren't able to get to here on this show that we'll potentially cover in the next one. But thanks for sending those in, everybody, and we really appreciate all the feedback we're getting. And again, big thanks to everybody supporting us on Patreon. Thanks, Jason, for coming on our show, talking about guild leading and stuff. And we'll be back next week with our last pre-recorded episode, and then we'll be live again. Good luck in the MDI trail, and good luck casting titles. And we'll see you guys next week.
Later, dudes.
Thanks, guys.